Hello and welcome to Recharge and Rise. I'm Emma Draycott, your host and founder of this event, and I'm also a anxiety and burnout freedom therapist. And I'm very excited to be welcoming Kate Starr today. So, Kate is a certified nervous system regulation practitioner, and she's got a master's degree in public health, and she specializes in supporting women. So she has her own unique program called SomaNeuro Alignment, where she combines psychology and physiological techniques to support people to move through to have a regulated nervous system. So she really supports people that are experiencing burnout and helps them get to the root cause. And I know that she very much has a mantra of that anybody that she works with, she works towards them never after her program, never needing her again. So so Kate, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to speak more on this topic and to speak more about how it applies to burnout and stress.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. So please share what led you to be here and doing what you are doing today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. Um, the way I think about it is it took me so long to figure out how to come out of, in my case, complex trauma. So I experienced a mixture of big T and maybe more complex, but smaller T, I guess you could say, traumas in my life. And I saw them coming up in cycles and patterns throughout my life. And at the same time, I was this incredibly accomplished, top of her class, always excelled, could make a spreadsheet for anything, type of woman where I got this kind of response often of, you'll be fine. You're always fine, right? Over time, it started to build and build and build. And I went through what I eventually had the language for of understanding as a nervous system shutdown. But at the time, it just felt like I was going crazy. Like I couldn't
Mm.
work anymore. I was exhausted all the time. I was irritable. I was oversleeping and also like shooting awake all the time. Everything was so out of whack in what felt very sudden to me, even though now I see the breadcrumbs building up, right? When this happened to me years and years ago, despite how academically inclined I was, how kind of extroverted and able to speak to a range of health practitioners, et cetera, I was, I found that it was very difficult to access the proper language, that I was either disregarded by practitioners or doctors as just needing to stress less, just needing to take medication, given a lot of diagnoses that were pretty big, like pretty
Mm.
massive kind of, I guess, labels to put on to me that I had never identified with in my life before, simply because of how much I was struggling now. And it wasn't until I kind of went on this, what I call eat, pray, love nervous system regulation journey, where I booked it. I, had to take a medical leave, emergency medical leave, and I had to go try out like the gamut of practitioners, everything from like horse therapists to spiritual healers to EMDR to hypnotherapy, and like we're talking about with this summit, the importance of just having that experience of trying so many different approaches to figure out what works for you, that I was finally given an understanding of the nervous system, what being dysregulated meant and looked like, and how this wasn't just something that, happened when you were a little stressed one day, that over time we can actually become stuck in certain states of survival. Whether that's a fight flight, or in my case, going down to a full kind of shutdown beyond just even that freeze state, right? So when I came back from that, right, it was a calling to take this work and apply it to women who I saw myself in a lot of women who were so ambitious and so driven, and it was leading them to, near burnout, eventually full burnout, and I didn't want anyone to get to the point where I had, right?
Mhm.
I had my master's degree and I had applied that to underserved communities internationally in the past. But what I found was that master's degree in understanding health programs and behavior change around health programs was vital to me understanding how do you motivate the least motivated women, right? The really burnt out, excuse me, exhausted women. And it transformed into this, incredible opportunity to coach these women directly, to build out programs, and to now have a team of women underneath me who are just so amazing and around the mission as well. So that's a little bit more in my story.
Yeah, that's amazing. And thank you for sharing that. So from your personal experiences, but blended with what you was already doing in your master's, really applying that learning to then provide this for women. And it is such a big motivator, isn't it? When we go through experiences ourselves. And I see this as that, we have our professional backgrounds and knowledge and understanding, but also I think when you've experienced something yourself, we're also experts by experience. And when we're able to share that and from that level of understanding with our clients, they feel that on another level, is my understanding. So with nervous system regulation or nervous system dysregulation, for those that might not really know exactly what that is, but they've seen the terms, but what actually is that, and why is it important to understand that when it comes to our lives as women, where we are ambitious, driven, stressed, and overwhelmed?
Absolutely. So one of the best ways I like to set the foundation for understanding nervous system regulation is that we are biological beings. And like any biological being, we are wired towards survival. We are not wired towards thriving and living our best lives. We can get there, but first and foremost, our purpose on this earth, as it is kind of ingrained into us, is to survive. And so if our purpose that must be, kind of set and feel good and be supported is that survival, then in order to get to a place where we feel peace and calm and can rest without feeling guilty and can enjoy, the ebbs and flows of life without feeling so drawn by them, we must come from a place of safety. Because when we have enough safety in our present reality, our survival need is met, right? So our nervous system, and when we're talking about nervous system dysregulation or regulation, we're really talking about our autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic has two arms. It has our sympathetic, which you'd think of as our kind of fight, flight, freeze, our survival responses. And it has our parasympathetic, which is often called our rest and digest. But I just think about this as like the relax and chill out type of part, right? And so when we're experiencing dysregulation, we're experiencing an imbalance between the two arms. And it's a sympathetic kind of, is being prioritized over our parasympathetic, because when the mind and body believe that there is some survival need met, it's going to prioritize your survival responses over letting you hang out on the couch and feel fine about it and relax, right? That kind of foundational understanding of the nervous system and that imbalance, and also that wired towards survival, is really how we understand the nervous system's relationship to burnout, along with an understanding of what we call polyvagal theory, which looks at the different states on a ladder. And without going too nitty gritty, I'll tell you this. One thing that's really important to understand is that everything within our system is trying to protect us. Every intrusive thought you have, every rumination cycle of anxiety, right? Every time your body does a symptom that really just like upsets you in that moment, it's coming from a place of protection. However, it starts to get a bit confused, miswired, when we've learned mechanisms of protection based on our past or our present experiences that actually aren't serving us to the extent that our subconscious or our survival mind believes that they are. And this is where we start to have some conflict with the body. It's also where we start to see that living in a high level of stress for a very long amount of time, maybe chronic stress, but maybe it's even just a couple months of being in that fight flight, eventually our bodies and minds will start to shut down. And that's where we move more into that freeze. Now, that functional freeze you may have heard of is kind of like that pre-full burnout stage where maybe you're crushing it at work, but you come home, you crash on the couch, you're not engaging with your partner or your kids. When you come to that full dorsal vagal shutdown, that's really where we find that it feels near impossible to pull yourself out of it. You just become a bit numb and desensitized to your experience.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. So thank you very
Yeah,
much for sharing that, because so when we're thinking about women in particular that are they're busy, they're very highly motivated, they've got lots of different responsibilities in terms of caring responsibilities for their own children, but maybe their parents, loved ones, you know, they're excelling at work, so they've got those types of responsibilities as well. Then I'd love to talk more about the freeze state, the functional freeze state, and what it actually looks like, feels like, and just some ideas of how people can recognize it and start to shift out of that state.
absolutely. Absolutely. So if we return back, like I almost wish I had a whiteboard, but picturing a ladder, right? And so in the middle, here's our kind of fight flight. And at the bottom here is our dorsal vagal shutdown. And at the top's our safe and social, right? That's where we try and go, our ventral vagal. If you picture going up a ladder, what polyvagal theory teaches us is that once we start to get beyond the fight flight into functional freeze or a full shutdown, it means that we actually have to kind of come up through our fight flight in order to eventually get to safe and social. Now, here's why, and then I'll kind of tie that into why functional freeze feels the way it does. When we start to go into any form of a freeze state, right, no matter how severe, whether it's even just like a little bit further down the ladder for a visual or just starting to shut down in certain contexts, dissociate in certain contexts. The reason we're doing that is because it's too painful to continue consistently living in the amount of stress that we are putting on our minds and bodies when we're living in that pure fight, flight, survival mode state. What this can look like, right, is that an email from your passive aggressive boss spirals you instead of being something that you just say, all right, that's annoying, I'm not going to deal with that. It can look like the, times that you used to spend with your partner felt very connecting, and now you just feel super irritable and on edge. But when we start to move into more of a functional freeze, what we're doing is that we're starting to numb ourselves out, slightly dissociate to that experience of stress so that it doesn't feel so painful, right? I
Mhm.
always give the analogy of a dog trapped in a cage. At the beginning, the dog's going to fight and bark and claw. But at a certain point, once they realize that that's not doing anything to help them, it's less painful to just shut down and kind of subdue themselves versus continue to fight and expend all that energy, right, on something that's not working, essentially. That functional freeze state is really driven in a lot of ways by what we equate to our worth. So the reason we see a functional freeze amongst ambitious driven, like career women, or ambitious driven, like badass moms who are doing like arguably the hardest job of all, right, is that they attribute in some ways often their worth or value to their productivity or their output. And so, what becomes the most essential thing to expend your energy on often looks like tasks that help others or that prioritize others, whether that's your boss, your partner, your child, etc., but never yourself. And so you'll see this kind of situation where you might give it all at your workday or, being a mom for the day or whatever that looks like, maybe always going to every social event. But then in your you time, you're completely kind of dissociated. Now, maybe you're binging Netflix while doom scrolling. That's a big one, kind of zoning out, etc. And at that stage, what's really key and important and difficult is to start finding ways to prioritize yourself, reconnect with yourself, and actually come back into your body and into your awareness so that you can process those feelings of stress rather than just repress or dissociate from them.
Yeah. And that's where the discomfort comes, isn't it? Potentially, because it's numbing, it's a survival mechanism, isn't it, to feel less. And then when we get into our bodies, obviously it's processing those feelings. So where do you usually start with your clients to help them to do that in a, in a safe way?
Absolutely. Because I work with very driven women, one thing that's really important for me to introduce as a concept early on is titration and making sure that we're actually not burning ourselves out on healing activities, just like we were burning ourselves out on work or life activities, right? There's this want to binge it all. I want the quick fix. I want to feel better right away. And I always joke that my program is the only program I know where you get celebrated for not doing something because it means you prioritize listening to yourself and your body over what, your coach or somebody else in your life told you you should do. So a lot of it is recreating that connection and that trust between body, mind, and self in general in a holistic way, right? What that translates into in a more tangible sense, right, is introducing concepts not only of just curiosity in general, right? I always say kind of becoming the researcher or the scientist in your own healing. You're collecting data, you're depersonalizing it a bit then, and you're adjusting your routine and the things that you do based on what the kind of returns are from those activities, right? But somatic curiosity, which is noticing how sensations, emotions are playing out in your body as a mechanism, essentially, to better understand them, to see them, and to pull yourself out of the intellectualization of our emotional experience. In the beginning, coming into the body feels one, a bit vague, but too often very scary. There's a reason we push this stuff away to the point of freezing, right? And so I think often it looks like gentle, small, and not needing to just sit there and sit in it for more than a couple seconds, but understanding that somatic curiosity can look like coming into the body for a moment, asking that part of the body what would help you to feel safer, and then taking movement because you can start to feel that energy moving and releasing, right? And I think that's the power of not only somatic experiencing and curiosity, but truly somatic movements and facial maneuvering to give you that next step beyond, all right, I'm in my body, now what, into tangible action.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. So, firstly, I was wondering about how do people go from intellectualizing emotions? So I guess I'm wondering is what is intellectualizing emotions compared to what you're talking about in terms of experiencing them? I'll just do one question at a time.
Yeah, and there are so many things in this work where I would describe it in imagery or colors or things that resonate with me, where it's going to look different for my clients. And it does come down to an intuitive knowing. And I think you kind of mentioned that intuition will be one of the themes in this summit. And it's so lovely to kind of talk through that and how do we really recognize intuition versus anxiety, right? And we don't always get it right. My understanding of intellectualization comes from kind of two, I would say, um, guides or reasons that we have a tendency to intellectualize versus to actually feel and process. One is that traditionally psychodynamic approaches to therapy and talk therapy were kind of touted as the gold standard for mental health overall. What we're learning now through holistic practices is that talk therapy is beneficial for some, psychodynamic is beneficial for some, and for many, it's combining that with other approaches, but also for many, there needs to be more resourcing and regulation before going into a psychodynamic approach. However, because it was kind of used as a kind of sweeping approach to anything related to mental health, what we saw is that a lot of individuals learned that if I talk about it and I dig into my past and I figure it out, I will get better, right? Without really having the platform or the foundation to go beyond that. And so I remember I could write a thesis on my mind. I could connect all the little dots and tell you why I'm this way and this and that. And I did not feel any better. If anything, I felt worse, right? So I think intellectualization looks like over analyzing or seeking to figure out why, with the feeling that why will fix it, when nervous system regulation is looking at more of the what. What can I do? What ways do I create safety? What action do I go, instead of kind of focusing on how much more knowledge I can gain, right? And then I think intellectualizing also looks like needing to use maybe verbiage or language to describe your emotions, which really limits us. Once you start to get further into somatic work and nervous system work in general, you start to find that your emotions have almost hues or different gradients, right? And so there's sadness overall, the sadness umbrella, but then there's that specific sadness that brings you this somatic feeling. And then there's this one that is a little different and you can sense it, but there's really not the language to go into as much depth as our feelings come up in our body as, right? And so it's moving away from needing to label only through language to labeling through sensations in the body that allows us to feel more connected to that sensation moving through us and therefore less afraid of it.
So, could you tell me a bit about the impact of like stress and trauma on the body? So, we're talking about somatic and emotions and feeling those, but what do you know to be true about how we hold emotion or past experiences? And what do you know to be true to help people move through that? So, I can hear you saying, like, there is a limit in talking about it. And I know that it's held in the body. So I'd love to get your insight on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple different ways that we find that stress and trauma are stored in the body. And the research here is still developing, but it's extremely promising, right? One of the big kind of words or ways that we talk about or associate the body with stress and trauma is through fascia, our connective kind of tissue layer through our muscles, our whole body. And so when we're talking about stored stress and trauma, what a lot of practitioners are talking about is that the fascia actually starts to hold and stress and store around the body. And for a lot of individuals, this looks like areas that are more vulnerable for our survival, like the hip area, the abdomen, etc. But for some of us, depending on how our body automatically reacts to traumas and stress, it could be in our shoulders or in the way that we hold ourselves. For some of us, it's heaviness in our chest or tightness in our throat. And so what I think is really key in the beginning of your journey with any facial maneuvering or somatics is to kind of try it all and notice where's resistance, where's pleasure and feeling good, where do I want to go today, how do I want to explore, and that brings back in that curiosity, because no one can do a body scan for you and say, oh, there's your trauma right there, right? So it's something that you need to have a willingness to discover as opposed to just be told, and that takes a level of intuition, right? But the other way, when we're talking about stress and trauma being stored in the body, that we see over time is that when our subconscious holds on to a past experience, whether it was a purely physical trauma or a more emotional kind of complex trauma, right? We continue to play that memory of that experience like a movie reel in our subconscious. And the reason for that is that the mind doesn't want you to forget it. And so what we see is that even if it was so innocuous, right, that your little sibling jumped out at you and scared you when you were younger, and now you don't even notice it fully, but every time you go through a hallway, you brace a little bit, right? Maybe you totally hadn't thought about it, but now you're just more jumpy because you always remember that someone came out of nowhere and did something that scared you, right? So trauma really is the body and mind trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. It feels random. And so I find that it also gets stored in the small kind of like micro behaviors and physical movements that we introduce throughout our day, in these subtle triggers throughout our day. And the last thing I'll kind of say on that is this is why it can be so powerful to not just look at triggers, because we'll never fully understand them all, avoid them all, understand what's calling in our subconscious, but instead look at how we create enough safety that those triggers don't register as a threat by expanding that window of tolerance.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. And in terms that you touched upon subconscious, what do you feel the role is in the subconscious in healing?
It's a great question. I think you cannot approach nervous system regulation solely from the body, somatics or vagal toning. And I'm seeing a lot recently on this idea that nervous system regulation alone isn't enough. But I think where I'm seeing some skewed understanding here is, how is nervous system regulation being defined? If you're not considering the subconscious in your nervous system work, then you're not doing true regulation. You're only doing one piece of the puzzle, so to speak, right? The subconscious and the body are both so essential in registering deeply felt safety. And what I say is, you want to be able to emotionally register in the subconscious, which holds our survival mind, right? That we actually are safe in this moment. Something can still be tough and stressful and annoying, but it's not life threatening to us in the way that causes triggers, panic attacks, our body kind of going into an out of control state, but also in the subconscious, rumination, negative self talk, limiting beliefs that we hold ourselves to. And so there's that piece of allowing the body to discharge, right? But also allowing the mind to discharge
Mhm.
as it does when it settles into safety. I'll say some of the subconscious work that we do, which ties into some a little conscious mind work, but we look at inner child work, we look at internal family systems and parts work. We use different types of hypnoses, including gut hypnosis for the gut brain axis, right? So that piece is absolutely essential as well.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And again, you touched on the holistic approach and bringing different approaches together, because you talked about the traditional talking and what I know to be true, and hence why I do offer different services, I guess, is because
Mhm.
I believe it wasn't enough, and that there are other elements of us that need to be supported to heal, because just focusing on one area often for people isn't enough. We do, obviously, we've spoken, we acknowledge that every person is different and their needs are different, but I'd love to, this is a little bit of a different line, but I would love to hear your understanding of, when people can't switch off, so there's that perpetual need to do something. So I know we talked about freeze and functional freeze,
Right.
but I'd love to talk about that. Why does that happen, and how can people begin to start to turn that down?
Yeah, absolutely. So that kind of restlessness, right, is a classic
Mm.
kind of fight flight state. And a lot of individuals will also tell you it's a classic trauma response. What's really important to me is not prescribing someone's trauma to them. So I really try to make it clear that you do not need to identify with trauma in order to feel restlessness, nervous system dysregulation, etc. I have plenty of clients who never felt like they had something traumatic happened, but later found out what was stored in their body was a bad fall when they were kids off their bikes, some situation where someone yelled at them who barely even matters, but they just took it in a certain way, right? And so when we're feeling that level of restlessness, what it often means is that we're seeking some form of distraction. We know that the way that the mind works in terms of our behaviors is through habit loops in the mind. We also know that's how anxiety works too, right? So I'm sure you're familiar. Looking at cue or trigger that leads to the behavior that leads to a certain reward. And we can, ironically, actually be rewarded with more anxiety on our anxiety, because it creates a level of, a worry loop and an ability to distract through more, and all these different complex ways, right? So when there's a behavior that's going on that feels frustrating to us, there's a cognitive dissonance. Our conscious mind doesn't want to be like this anymore. I don't want to feel like I can't just rest, but my subconscious still believes that there's some valuable reward or protection associated with that restlessness. At the same time, if my cortisol is high, there's hormone changes, shifts in my body that are keeping me in a more heightened state. It can be really difficult to logic our way out of this. right? And
Mhm.
so recommendations around restlessness, I mean, there's so many when it comes from a holistic standpoint. The biggest thing is you want to find ways to create safety that allows your system to know it's okay to rest. Because if there's restlessness, there's an underlying understanding that something must be done because there's some threat or some reason we aren't allowed to just enjoy that nothing bad is going on, right? Sometimes that's because past memories keep coming up. Other times it's our home environment is stressful or our rumination on different, things in our careers or in our family life. I can go into some of the ways that I would recommend for restlessness, but I think it really is, like we've been speaking about, such a unique approach to that individual and the way that they equate or associate a certain reward with that restlessness.
Yeah, so it's understanding the underlying behavior, need, understanding what the body is getting from that, definitely.
Mhm.
In terms of something you touched on earlier, and definitely I see, is rewards in productivity, in
Mm.
achievement. And I don't really know many people that aren't rewarded or haven't been rewarded for doing well. For, whether that's, throughout our schooling, I feel like our schooling is set up in that way, isn't it? So, you know, but I know it can feel very, very uncomfortable to feel like you've got some spaciousness, you could relax, but it feels like if you like if you did, like there's an impending doom, like there's something that you've got to see to, like something bad's going to happen, like you've missed something. Oh, I'm meant to be doing something, so it interrupts you from being able to rest.
Absolutely. And I think the short-term rewards of productivity, and we are very short-sighted when it comes to these things, right? Are not outweighed by the long-term rewards of allowing yourself to rest. But those rewards take much more time to come to us. So it feels like, okay, I'm forcing myself to rest. It would be so much easier if I just got up and sent that email. If I just got up and did that extra hour of work, you have to sit in that level of discomfort for enough time for it to benefit you. But I think you also have to take action to support yourself in that discomfort, not just sit down and say, I'm forcing myself down here, because then again, you're creating that distrust between the body, right? You're forcing the body to do something it doesn't want to do instead of listening to it feels uncomfortable, but where's a middle ground where I can meet it? And I think that's really when we're doing the kind of push and pull of this work that's unique to each individual.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for sharing that. So just wondering if there's anything I have. Oh, I believe I've actually, the things I wanted to ask you, I've just naturally, it's come up in conversation. So that is amazing. So the last thing I would love to ask you then is for people that are listening right now, and then if you think about women that come to you initially, what is usually one piece of advice or information that they might not already have that is often really, really powerful for them?
Oh, I love this. I have lots, but the one that's coming to me right now, and maybe it's just because, it clients go in waves, and everyone deals with the same thing one week, right? I've had clients come to me and feel that it's their shortcoming, that activities like meditation or certain mindfulness activities, yoga, um, different types of like hard workouts to get their stress out, whatever, are not working for them, and they feel it's their own fault. I'm not good enough to do this. I just get distracted. I'm not committing to it. I'm not, showing up enough for my health. And it's this self blame, right? When that kind of stuff happened to me, which is very good scientific reasons as to why when we're dysregulated, certain types of approaches like those do not work and can really actually further feelings of dysregulation. And instead of blaming myself and saying, well, all the experts say I should be able to do this, I said, you know what, I'm intelligent. And if this isn't working for me, there's got to be a reason why. And so I'd encourage any woman who's on her journey and is finding that something isn't working for her to be more skeptical of the practice than she is skeptical of herself. Because from that place of being unwilling to settle into, well, you're just not doing it, you're just not showing up, right? It's your fault. You don't want it bad enough, which we all know we want to feel better bad enough, is where you actually come into finding the healing practices that truly work for you. And you'll later find through that journey that you were right all along, right? If you trust that you know that something isn't working and then you find the other solution, you get there. If you continue to try and rinse and repeat because somebody, Joe Schmo, who barely knows you, tells you to, you will stay stuck, right? So it's a trust within self.
Interesting. I know that when I'm looking around recommending things like meditation, of course, do guided audios for my clients, not it's not the right time for everybody to do that type of work because it can cause discomfort. Um, so I'd love to know a little bit more about that actually. So how do you know when that's not the ideal approach at that time? So things like, because we do know that meditation, yoga, all of these different things are really, really helpful. But what makes it not so helpful? Is there circumstances or is there something about those practices at certain times that make it a little bit more difficult?
Yeah, absolutely. So mindfulness activities like meditation that focus on, and it's always going to be specific types, right? So I don't want somebody to think that I'm saying like those things are bad. Not at all. I just think they have a certain time and place. Ultimately, your biggest indication that you probably aren't in the right space to do something is if you do it and you feel worse doing it. So rather than beating yourself up and saying, I hate meditating, but I have to do it, or I hate yoga, try a different approach, right? Now, with meditation and yoga, because I know people are always curious about why I would say that I don't include those in my program for dysregulation, though I have so many clients who end up doing them as they feel better and all of that, is because they are focused on what can become with certain limiting beliefs or beliefs about ourselves. They can kind of invigorate a level of perfectionism. I'm trying to clear my mind. I'm getting mad at my thoughts for coming in, trying to force my body to sit still or to contort into positions where my breathing is restricted or I feel uncomfortable. In yoga, there's a lot of holding on to them until your body allows you. And what actually happens for a lot of clients is that leads to a level of dissociation. It's not the body accepting, it's the body going, I don't have a choice, so I'm just going to shut down, right? In meditation as well, we may do some visualizations. I have clients who do guided meditations, and I tell everyone, no matter what, if you want to take any movement through anything we're doing, take it. Because when we have a scratch or our body wants to stretch, we say, no, we're doing a meditation now, sit still. We've now furthered that disconnection from our body instead of allowing that energy to move through us as our body's asking for it. And when we take that movement that feels right to us, so I can't tell you how many yoga classes I've been in where I go, I'm just going to lie down and do my own thing in the middle of the class because it's just not right for me what they're doing that day, right? I've now told my body that I care more about what you want and need than I care about what this other person is telling me I should be doing right
That makes a lot of sense. So thank you so much for sharing
now.
that because it's more about, as I understand that, actually listen to your own body,
Yeah.
listen to your own body's needs, and allow yourself to do that. Because yeah, I really, as you was saying that, yes, actually, yeah, we do stop ourselves from doing other things, or
Yeah.
we're asking our bodies to do a certain thing because that's what we should be doing. And then there's shoulds and there's obligations. And you really beautifully illustrated how that, we have a disconnection then of our body and then we dissociate. So I can see that it's really helpful that you shared that information to see what you exactly meant by that,
Yeah.
because we do know that obviously these practices, practices can be very helpful, but I can see now, yeah, and the forcing and the perfectionism that might come up in and the meditation, it's of course you don't need to empty your mind at all. That really is a bit of a myth, and it's not always what you would expect. So I know my own experiences with meditation, I thought it was one thing and now I meditate
Right.
very regularly, but it's
Mm-hmm.
finding what works for me. So like a lot of women I speak to, it's having it fully guided. Like
Yeah. Mhm.
and not having those massive gaps of silence where your mind wanders. It's, and it's having a voice that, you know, I resonate with, etc. So thank you so much for sharing and being clear on that. It's really, really helpful. So yeah, really get from that. Actually go with what your body needs and allow yourself and build trust in that way because you are responding.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think I can't think of anything worse than being forced to do something when I'm feeling panicked or anxious. That
Yeah.
somebody says, and then that's why I think it's so important to meditation is not always just clearing your mind, but there are people who try and take that approach. And I can't think of anything worse than feeling overwhelmed and trying to force what's coming up out
Yeah.
of protection and needs to be heard. And I need to meet those parts of myself into either silence or at times, right? A guided practice of somebody talking about something when all I want to do is feel what I'm feeling and not be told what to feel. And so I think what we're both speaking to, which I'm sure you practice as well, is just that if you are being called for whatever reason to stop the meditation, to lie down in the yoga class, to like, do something different, just do it because you can always come back and do that practice again. It will always be there. But what won't continue to be there if you continue to push it down is your ability to feel and hear your body and celebrate that, right? And so
Mm.
ultimately, the patient is the teacher, right? We are coaches and we can offer guidance, but I am never going to know more than my client knows about herself.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. Thank you. What a great sentence to end on. So I'd like to thank you for being here, but I'd also like you to have the opportunity to share your gift that you have for people and how they'll be able to access it by clicking below. But do you want to describe what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a master class recorded on what it actually means to take a root cause approach to regulation, right? Because we hear a lot of, quick fixes, going to the root. I didn't know what that meant, and I really needed support in understanding it. And really, that root cause approach, its value, and that we don't have to live in daily routines for the rest of us, right? Our goal is to really be able to regulate in an integrated, organic way, not just because I do my 5 minutes of vagal toning in the morning and my 10 minutes of somatics, but that it's through the way that I'm living and experiencing. So I will share the link to that. It'll kind of talk about what we've been speaking about, that truly holistic approach of marrying body-based practices with subconscious-based work, and actually how we can use one and the other to get into deeper versions of the alternative, right? To help us into one kind of merged practice.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it'll be really, really valuable. And then just a gentle reminder for those of you who haven't already heard that my free gift to you is to join me in a 3-day live experience where I'll be sharing my freedom formula with you. That is your freedom from anxiety and burnout. So that link will be below as well. So listeners, thank you so much for being here and sharing your time and energy with us. Kate, thank you so much for a beautiful conversation, really unpicking things that, you know, to really make sense and understanding from them. So thank you so much for your valuable insights. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you today.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. And it's been so awesome. I love going into this stuff and to hear how it applies beyond my work, but to all these other practitioners is so powerful. So I look
Yeah.
forward to watching the rest of the sessions. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. So for everybody else, I'll see you as well on the next session. So bye for now.